Now let's move on to the second session of the day, and we are in Braille Hall. And let me invite Mr. Moderator for this session, Dr. Mohit Khatri. Welcome, Doctor. Dr. Mohit. Hi,
Yes,
how are
good
you?
morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I'm doing perfectly well.
Yeah,
Hope all is well out there.
everything is fine, Doctor. So we are for the second session, and we are good to go. We are already late for 3 minutes, but it's okay.
That's
We'll
great.
adjust. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, very good morning to all the ladies and gentlemen out here. And myself, Dr. Mohit from Kanpur, hosting this session at Hyde Park in the Braille Hall today in AIOC. And by God's grace, somehow we have met, not physically but virtually. This is quite interesting and very new experience. And kudos and hats off to all the AV team, the AIOS committee, and the organizers who have put up such a beautiful show out here for this conference. And first of all, I would like to invite and welcome the chairman for this session, Dr. Divyesh P. Shah. Welcome, sir, out here. Sir, are you there?
Yes, he's here. He's here. Hi, sir.
Yeah, that's great. And
My
my
internet
co-chairman would be
connection is very poor. It comes and goes. Somehow we have not been able to rectify. I'll try to be there with you as far as possible.
That's great. Good to see you, sir, in OT suit. Very nice. And welcome, co-chairman, sir, Dr. Tuhin Chaudhary.
Yes, I am here.
That's great to see you here, sir. The convener for this session would be Dr. Arundhati Tamuli. Welcome, madam. Co-convener shall be Dr. Sudipta Mitra. Very good morning,
Yes.
madam. Welcome to this session. And I
Good
shall
morning.
moderate. And I shall moderate this session at Hyde Park. So we will have some presentations of free paper, and the presenters shall be here. And hopefully, people have logged in and would be abiding by the time. And our hall coordinator is very well dressed, nicely formally dressed, and is very much attentive, giving thumbs up to us. So that's great.
Thank
So
you,
we'll
Dr. Mohit.
have a-
Sorry to cut you short. Do you want to mention the timelines to the speakers, please?
Yeah, please, you can take this lead and tell the time.
Sure. So this session is till 10:55. So approximately we have 85 minutes. So, and we have almost 16 speakers. So imagine 5 minutes for each speaker and just 1 minute for discussion, 4 to 5 minutes for speaking and 1 minute for discussion. So I request all speakers to please abide by timeline. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Mohit.
Oh, thank you. So that was quite informative. 5 minutes. It's going to be fast and furious, and well, we should individually pick up what we want to ask, and just one question per talk would be enough, I think. And if time permits, later on we can have another interactive session of discussion. So let's jump on to the first presentation. So that
Sorry,
would be
Doctor. There is a small correction, Dr. Mohit. 4 minutes for speaking and 1 minute for discussion, please.
That's further furious. That's good. 4 minutes. So we are going to have a 4 minute talk by each of the presenter, and Madam Sudipta is giving a good smile, and so I can see that she is not going to be harsh on the presenters. So I would like to invite the first presenter. I think he would be from Professor Pragya Panda. And the topic is clinical profile of toxic keratoconjunctivitis due to accidental injury by Calpropis juice. So, are you there, Professor?
Yeah, Dr. Prangya is here. Can you please unmute, ma'am, and share your screen?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, very much. Please.
Yes, I'm sharing this.
We can see your screen, ma'am. You can start.
Can I start now?
Yes, please.
A very good morning to one and all. My topic for today's presentation is clinical profile of toxic keratoconjunctivitis due to accidental injury by Calotropis juice. Regarding introduction of the topic, Calotropis is a large shrub growing into 4 meters tall. It has clusters of waxy flowers that are either white or lavender in color. The flower has 5 pointed petals. It has small crown raising from the center, which holds the stamen. The flowers are long lasting and used in floral arrangements. And certain religious occasions, these flowers are used. Extract of the flowers and the leaves have hypoglycemic effect. The leaves and the stem, when incised, yield thick milky juice. The milky juice causes toxic keratoconjunctivitis if accidentally instilled into the eye. There is reversible vision loss. To start with, there is gross diminution of vision if it is accidentally instilled into the eye. Ground flower keratitis is a rare condition. There is a stromal edema and damage to the corneal endothelium mainly. Resolution of corneal edema is complete and visual recovery is also complete usually. Regarding the materials and methods, we have studied 15 cases within a period of 1 year. Detailed external examination of the eye was done with slit lamp. Visual acuity was recorded, intraocular pressure measured, and endothelium of the cornea was examined with specular microscope. Immediately, thorough washing was done with Ringer's lactate. Then dexamethasone eye ointment was applied to the conjunctival sac, carboxymethyl cellulose eye drop, vitamin A pamitate were instilled. Anti-glaucoma eye drops and cycloplegics were given in required cases. Vitamin C was given to all. To large abrasions, bandage contact lens was given. Patients were observed at the end of 24 hours, third day, end of first week, second week, first month, second month, and third month. Out of our 15 cases, 9 female and 6 male. All the ages were more than 50 years, and the time of the 12 in the case of February and March, and 3 cases in August. And all the females were housewife, 5 flower vendor, and 1 pandit of a temple. So regarding the visual acuity, 5 cases had more than 6/60 visual acuity, and 6 cases had 6/60 to 3/60 visual acuity, and 4 cases less than 3/60 visual acuity. 10 cases were unilateral and 5 cases were bilateral. Conjunctival congestion was present in all the cases, pain in 10 cases, ciliary congestion in 4 cases, corneal epithelial defect 5 cases, Descemet's fold in 10 cases, and raised intraocular pressure in 3 cases. So corneal endothelial cell toxicity of Calotropis latex is caused by its ability to penetrate the corneal edema that induces permanent loss of corneal endothelium. Corneal edema resolves if sufficient endothelial cell viability is present. Most of the patients gave a history that they wash their face with water. After 1 week, congestion reduced, Descemet fold reduced, BCVA improved, endothelial cell count reduced only in 2 cases, and the visual acuity improved in all the cases, leaving only 2 cases. So to conclude, Calotropis causes painful sudden diminution of vision. It may cause reduction of endothelial cell count. Health education like washing hands after contact with the flower or rubbing the eyes by plucking the flowers can prevent injury. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. That was great. And you were well in time, and good information you gave as a carry-home message that one should keep washing hands, that we have been listening for last 1.5 years, washing hands and washing hands. I think that's the one thing we are going to do most. So that's great. But can you give one important medical message? What drug to be used, what drug not to be used in this injury? Especially for steroids, I would say.
Yes. So immediately steroid. Yeah, immediately steroid is very much useful.
Okay.
Washing, after washing thoroughly, immediately application of steroid and carboxymethyl cellulose. That is more than adequate, because most of these cases resolve completely. There is complete resolution occurs.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. That was great. And You can stop sharing your screen, and I now invite the second speaker, Dr. Shivati Sahu, to present the paper on herpes simplex keratitis complicating dry eye disease.
Am I visible, sir? Good morning.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, very much. Start,
yeah.
madam.
Myself, Dr. Shivati Sahu, presenting in case of herpes keratitis complicating dry eye disease. Introduction. Dry eye occurs when there is inadequate tear volume or function, uh, resulting in unstable tear film of herpes disease. Herpes keratitis is a viral infection of eye caused by herpes simplex virus. There are two types of major types of virus. Type 1 is most common and primarily affect the face, causing familiar cold sore and fever blisters. Type 2 is sexually transmitted form of herpes, infecting genitals. Range of complications that can occur from the herpes infection and sequelae are chronic complications of herpes eye disease range from epithelopathy to frank neurotropic or metaherpetic ulcers. Long-standing disciform keratitis may also result in bullous keratopathy. Late complications of deep vascular stromal scarring include secondary lipid keratopathy. Stromal inflammation may lead to visually significant corneal scarring and irregular astigmatism. Rarely, it can lead to limbal deficiency, leading to non-healing keratitis and need for therapeutic keratoplasty with high risk for graft failure. Case report: 44-year-old male reported in our OPD. He complained of redness and burning sensation in right eye associated with diminution of vision since 1 month, for which he took self-medications, over-the-counter drugs. History of rashes over right side of abdomen, 1.5 months, was dermal herpes. He has recurrent episodes of herpes keratitis in past 5 years. Past history of left eye keratoplasty 9 months back for corneal melting, and was suffering from dry eye and dry mouth since 2 years. On the clinical examination, right eye vision was 6 by 12. Circumciliary convolution was present. Corneal edema with ulcer near limbus with stromal involvement. Superficial vascularization and reduced corneal sensation was seen. Fluorescein staining right eye. Mild corneal edema was present. Corneal ulcer present near limbus. Location 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. 2 mm breadth at stroma. 3 mm breadth at stroma depth. Anterior stroma was involved and filtration present on the margin of ulcer. Superficial vascularization was present and corneal sensation seemed to be reduced. On examination of left eye, vision, hand movements positive, PR was inaccurate. Conjunctivization of cornea was present, cornea was opaque and rest details were not appreciable. Treatment given was systemic tablets, acyclovir 400 mg QID for 21 days. Locally, right eye drop moxi QID, eye drop CMC QID, eye drop tropicamide HS, and eye ointment acyclovir 5% 5 TID was given. In discussion, uh, the occurrence of jogging syndrome-like illness as dry eye symptoms or signs in patients having confirmed viral infections. The viral infections can induce neoantigen expression due to molecular mimicry between viral and host antigen, resulting in production of autoantibodies, cytotoxic T cells, or both directed to different host tissues. Once the innate immunity response is initiated in glandular and dendritic cells, there is an upregulation of adhesion proteins and increased production of chemokines that become activated and start acting as antigen presenting cells. Those events could eventually lead to overproduction of immunoglobulins, autoantibodies, and memory lymphocytes, and subsequently tissue damage and dysfunction due to apoptosis and inflammation. Herpes simplex virus, one ocular infection, is common cause of
Please
ocular
speed up, ma'am.
herpes disease. It can present in broad range of manifestations from primary peripheral conjunctivitis to recurrent form to, of conjunctivitis and even intraocular involvement as that is seen in retinitis and uveitis. Although there is no evidence of HSV direct infection in lacrimal gland, it has been demonstrated that corneal sensation and tear production are significantly lower in patients with herpetic disease. Herpetic keratitis may be a risk factor for development of limbal deficiency. Patients with herpes keratitis should be monitored for the development of limbal cell disease to reduce the risk of chronic ocular surface morbidities. In conclusion, I conclude when patient presenting with herpes simplex infection, ocular or systemic, should be always be counseled for high risk signs and symptoms and need for regular follow-up with proper evaluation of related systemic and autoimmune disorders. Special attention should be given for signs of Sjogren's-like illness and development of limbal cell deficiency in follow-up to reduce the risk of chronic ocular surface morbidity. There is need to counsel every patient of viral infection to not to self-medicate. Thank you. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sudipta, please
Yeah.
ask a question.
Yeah, it was a very nice presentation, ma'am. Just
Thank
to
you,
yeah. Now you have lastly mentioned that there's a predisposition of dry eye patients with viral infection, and here you suspected viral infection because of dry eye, or on the other way, if you have a patient of viral infection, we should go for looking into the systemic disease. Now, what prompted you to, first of all, when you saw the patient for the first time, was it the reason of self-medication, you think, or was it the reason of a previous herpes infection that he developed this disease?
Ma'am, actually, when he presented to our OPD, he complained that he has taken medications from various hospitals. He was not a reliable patient for the treatment. Didn't follow up our
So
advices
you
as
mentioned
well.
self-medication, ma'am.
Yes,
Self-medication.
yes,
So
ma'am. He was taking self-medication because he has previous episodes. So he gave us the history that he was taking self-medication.
in spite of the fact that the other eye had melted and was cornea was replaced, right? That
Yes,
was
ma'am.
done before, and after that he was taking
Yes, ma'am.
self-medication. So you think it was because of the self-medication that he developed the herpes in that eye?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am, because he showed us the steroid drops and that can aggravate the infection. And
Anyway,
he has
let's take the
recurrent
take-home message
episodes.
from your discussion. Let's have a take-home message from you. It is that we should not self-medicate. You mean that, or you want to say that dry eye patients, we have viral infections very commonly. So in that case, we have to be more careful when we are dealing with it and having search for a systemic infection. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
is it
These
something
two
like?
are my the take-home messages.
Okay,
So
that's
we
great.
can.
Okay, thank you so
And
much.
thank you so
Okay,
much.
we
Thank you.
can go to the we can go to the next speaker then.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I invite Dr. Manoj Chetikar to present on late onset Stargardt disease.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Is my screen visible?
Yes,
Yes,
Manoj, Dr.
very
Manoj.
much. Please be fast.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. The topic of my today's presentation is late onset Stargardt's disease. Screen is not moving.
Dr. Manoj, just click on the screen. One single click on the screen and then try.
Yes. Thank you. The variations in the ABCA4 genotype are the most common cause of autosomal recessive retinal diseases in the humans. The Stargardt's disease is the mildest form of ABCA4 phenotypes, while a form of retinitis pigmentosa is the most severe. The clinical presentation of Stargardt's is quite variable in age of onset, presenting symptoms and fundus appearance, and this variability is often daunting to the ophthalmologists who see the condition infrequently. The clinical findings in the patients with ABCA4 disease can be explained by the severity of ABCA4 genotype, relative sensitivity of the foveal cones to the genotype, the relative sensitivity of the RPE to the genotype. Coming to our case report, the 55-year-old male presented to our OPD with complaints of diminution of vision for the last 3 years in both eyes, which is not associated with any pain, redness, or photophobia. There was no history of night blindness, delayed dark adaptation, impaired peripheral vision, similar complaints in the family members. There was no significant drug history, and patient was not a smoker. General physical examination, vital, systemic examination was within normal limits. Coming to the ocular examination, best corrected visual acuity in Snell's was 6/16 both eyes. IOP was 14 mmHg. The ocular movements were full and painless. There was no RAPD. There was grade 3 immature cataract. Coming to the posterior segment examination, the optic disc size shape was normal, margin was well defined, cup disc ratio was 0.3:1, AV ratio was 2:3. Macula of the both eyes showed dull foveal reflex with yellowish white dots surrounding the hyperpigmented area confined to the macula. This is a color fundus photograph of our patient. The OCT of the both macula showed the severe foveal thinning with ellipsoid zone rarefied with subfoveal hyperreflectivity. The pattern ERG was showed the reduced amplitude of scotopic and photopic responses. The most probable diagnosis was late onset Stargardt's in this case. The genetic testing is confirmatory. No active intervention was done in this case. The long-term follow-up is needed. Coming to the genotypic and phenotypic variations in the ABCR4 gene, when the one allele is hypomorphic, there can be ARMD-like feature. When the both alleles are hypomorphic, it can give a clinical feature of fundus flavimaculatus. When there is one hypomorphic allele and null in the another allele, it can give a picture of Stargardt's. When there is one hypomorphic and another allele is null, it can give a picture of cone rod dystrophy. When both the alleles are null, then it will give a clinical picture of retinitis pigmentosa. Stargardt disease varies in the clinical spectrum. The age of onset could be indicative of disease severity, with earlier onset being associated with more aggressive disease course. The adult onset Stargardt is generally associated with missense mutation and has better prognosis, whereas childhood onset is largely linked to the null variants and has poor prognosis. The cases of very late onset, that is after sixth decade, are extremely rare. There are no approved treatment for Stargardt disease. The different therapies are under investigations. The most promising are visual cycle modulators, complement inhibitors, gene therapy, and stem cell therapy. These are my references. Thank you.
That was good, Dr. Manoj. You finished well in time. Can you give some message to us that have you ever tried to investigate it on Octa or something more investigative you can try for Stargardt's?
No, sir. Octa was not done, sir, in this patient.
Okay. And what type of gene counseling or gene analysis you did for the case?
Sir, actually, the patient was lost to follow up. The pandemic started and patient was lost to follow up, sir. So we could not assess further in this case. Sir.
So can you give one carry-home message? What benefit out of this study we can take?
Sir, ABCA4 genotype has a variety of phenotype because of its genetic heterogeneity. It can present at any age. It can come in elderly people it can present as a AMD in elderly age. So patient has to be it has a quite variable presentation, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. You can stop sharing your screen. And now I invite Dr. Sarang Hansraj to present an insidious fundus.
Dr. Mohit, I guess Dr. Sarang and the next speaker, Dr. Colonel Rajendra Prasad Gupta, they are not available. Still, let's announce, and otherwise we'll go for
next speaker. If they are not available, then can I have Dr. Chaitanya B to present cornea farinata?
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes. Please start.
Good morning, everyone. Today I am presenting a case report on cornea farinata. A 9-year-old male child presented with the outpatient department of ophthalmology by his parents with complaints of whitish appearance of black part of both eyes since birth. There was no history of redness, watering, discharge, and ocular trauma or ocular surgery. Boy was born through a cesarean section and attained milestones according to the age. Systemic examination was normal. Psychiatric assessment was done and the IQ level was found to be 55, which indicates mild to moderate intellectual disability. On ocular examination, visual acuity in the right eye was 6/9 and in the left eye was 6/9. Corneal examination showed normal epithelium, cloudy cornea with tiny faint dust-like opacities in the mid and deep stroma with intact descemetes and endothelium. Rest of the anterior segment examination was normal and the B scan was normal. Horizontal and vertical diameters of the cornea were normal. IOP in the right eye was 22.2 and left eye was 19.9 mm of mercury, measured by non-contact tonometer. ENT reference was done, which needed BERA for evaluation of sensory neural hearing loss. Pediatric neuromedicine reference was done, which evaluated that there was no clinical evidence of mucopolysaccharidosis. Ultrasound abdomen showed no evidence of organomegaly. And his 5-year-old brother also had a similar presentation, which was brought to notice by his parents after a detailed family history and was examined in detail. He also had a whitish appearance of black spot of both eyes since birth, and there was no history of redness or watering or discharge or ocular trauma or ocular surgery. He was born through cesarean section and attained milestones according to the age, and systemic examination was normal. Psychiatric assessment was done and the IQ level was found to be subnormal to average intelligence. On ocular examination, there was no visual acuity disturbance. Corneal examination showed normal epithelium, cloudy cornea with fine dust-like whitish opacities in the deep stroma with intact descemetes and endothelium. Rest of the anterior segment examination was normal and B scan was normal. Corneal diameters were found to be normal. IOP in the right eye was 23 mm of mercury and left eye is 24 mm of mercury by non-contact tonometer. ENT reference was done, which showed left ear active chronic suppurative oterized media, and pediatric neuromedicine reference was done, which evaluated that there was no clinical evidence of mucopolysaccharidosis. Ultrasound abdomen showed no evidence of organomegaly. Coming to discussion, several corneal conditions present with cloudy cornea, such as birth trauma, mucopolysaccharidosis, congenital hereditary endothelial dystrophy, sclerocornea, rubellar keratitis, and cornea farinata. In the above cases, there was no facial coarseness, no skeletal abnormalities, and no other clinical evidence of mucopolysaccharidosis. Urine sample of the case report 1 was sent for glycosaminoglycan examination, and the report was found to be normal for the age group. There was no reduced corneal diameter, and there was a visible border between sclera and cornea, which rules out sclerocornea. Rubellar keratitis was ruled out with specific clinical and hematological investigation. Slit lamp biomicroscopy showed normal descemetes membrane and endothelium. There was no associated deafness, no photophobia, and watering, which ruled out congenital hereditary endothelial dystrophy. Several corneal conditions with fine opacities involving the posterior stroma were reported, such as cornea farinata, deep filiform dystrophy, posterior punctiform dystrophy, punctate predescemetes dystrophy, and predescemetes dystrophy. Presence of bilateral faint floor like tan to white dots localized in the deep central stroma just anterior to descemetes layer, and a normal descemetes membrane and endothelium depict a clinical and morphological similarity to cornea farinata. Age of onset and specific symptoms vary among the different forms of corneal dystrophy. They progress slowly, do not affect other areas of the body, and tend to run in families. Most forms are inherited as autosomal dominant traits. Till date, little is known about the pathology of cornea farinata, in which deposits are asymptomatic and do not interfere with the vision. Though it is common in aged, it may occur as a familial trait. Further, confocal microscopy helps to confirm the diagnosis and to differentiate it from other corneal dystrophic conditions. Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Yes, that was good. You presented well in time. Dr. Tuhin, please ask the question.
So, doctor, have you, this endothelium was perfect in both the cases?
Yes, sir.
And this vision was how much?
Pardon, sir?
Best corrected visual acuity was how much?
In the elder boy, it was 6/9, 6/9, sir. And in the younger boy, he is not reliable, sir. So we cannot take it accurately, but he could read like counting finger 3 meters, sir.
Okay, so the patients came to you just because there is some opacity in the cornea.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It is appearing as a white cornea, like it is gradually increasing the dose.
And what is this pachymetry in all those cases?
Sir, we could.
Because when you don't have this confocal microscopy, you can go for pachymetry, and sometimes even though it is told that it is this descemetes membrane and endothelium is perfectly fine, but some sort of this corneal edema may be there in the central area. So pachymetry might have been better idea in these cases. Otherwise, very good, nice presentation and nice case report also.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So that was great. Now I would like to invite Dr. Ankisha Jain to present her paper. Is she there?
Yes. Good morning, sir.
Yeah. Good morning. Please start.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, Dr. Ankesha, we can hear you. Can you share your screen, please?
Yes. Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it's coming up. We can see you. We can hear you. Please start. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning. My topic for presentation is optic disc changes, retinal nerve fiber layer, and visual field defects in normal tension glaucoma. Normal tension glaucoma is characterized by loss of neuroretinal rim NTG is characterized by loss of neuroretinal rim corresponding RNFL defects and visual field defects despite intraocular pressure consistently within normal range. Vascular ischemia produces localized optic nerve head damage in NTG. My aim is to analyze association between optic disc changes, retinal nerve fiber layer, and visual field defects in normal tension glaucoma patients. Study was conducted in Glaucoma Clinic, Department of Ophthalmology, SSMC Riva from September 19 to Jan 20. It was a cross-sectional, observational cross-sectional study that included 50 NTG patients. All eyes underwent comprehensive and standardized ophthalmic examination and 90D by microscopy. Optic nerve head assessed through spectral domain OCT and visual field through standard automated perimetry. Figure 1 is showing superior arcuate defect in my patient with 24-2 pattern and RNFL analysis in the patient. According to visual field defect, all the patients were divided into subgroups. Group SA showing superior arcuate defects and group IA with inferior arcuate defects. Below table shows a correlation between inferior RNFL. Am I cursor visible, sir? This is inferior peripapillary RNFL thickness and pattern standard deviation among SA group with the correlation coefficient is 0.81. Below table and graph showing correlation between superior RNFL thickness and a pattern standard deviation among IA group with the correlation 0.3. Although p-value was not significant with the correlation, in our study, mean IOP in the patient was found to be 13.67 mm Hg, mean optic disc as 2.88 mm square, and mean rim area 0.86 mm square, all measured through SD-OCT. PSD was found to be 10.4 decibel with inferior RNFL thickness as we have seen in the table, 50.63 micron, and superior RNFL thickness was 95.05 in SA group. In IA group, PSD was 9.02 decibel with superior RNFL thickness 54.4 and inferior mean RNFL thickness 67.3 microns among IA group. Coming to the discussion part, key feature is to detect quadrant-wise RNFL thickness, especially inferior, as localized damage more common in NTG patients. Visual field test is subjective one, which depends more on the patient response. Also, the time consuming and it is tiring to the patient. So it would be therefore convenient if we could predict visual loss from the optic disc and RNFL morphology. But in our study, correlation between structure and function was not good enough. Furthermore, to obtain a full characterization of glaucomatous damage and detecting its progression, both structural and functional measurements are especially necessary, especially paramount for diagnosing early NTG patients. We concluded peripapillary RNFL thickness are correlated with visual field damage in NTG patients. Thank you. Hello.
Presentation. Any questions from the panelists? Any questions from the panelists? Dr. Sudipta?
It's a good presentation, yeah. Can you just sum up and give us a take-home message from your presentation?
Yes, ma'am. In normal tension glaucoma, basically glaucomatous damage occurs with normal intraocular pressure less than 21 mm Hg. So we should be keen for diagnosing such patients, and we should see clinical examination and SD-OCT examination to diagnose them, and should not rely completely on the visual field defects.
I think we can move on to the next speaker.
Dr. Mat, we have Dr. Khatri here.
Yeah, I think it's
Yes, I am there.
Yes, sir. Please call the next speaker.
Amrita.
Yeah. So Dr. Amrita, please come and join and present your paper.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'll just start sharing my screen. So is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. So today I'm presenting a case to signify the structural and functional outcome of scleral patch graft for anterior staphyloma in case of rhinosporidiosis. So rhinosporidiosis is a chronic granulomatous infection which manifests as vascular soft polyploidal pedunculated or sessile mass in the eye. Conjunctiva and lacrimal sac are the most commonly involved areas, and ocular involvement is seen in around 15% of the cases. The causative organism Rhinosporidium seaberi lives in ponds and lakes and infects the nasal and oral cavities in humans. Coming to our case, a 20-year-old female with no contributory medical illness presented with a mass in the left eye, gradually increasing in size since the last 2 years, and gradual diminution of vision since the last 2 years. There's past history of excision of mass from conjunctiva, in the same eye 16 years back. There's history of frequently bathing in public ponds which are frequented by cattle. And there is no history of any recurrent attacks of pain, redness, watering, diplopia, or as such. The best corrected visual acuity in the left eye was 20/2000 with restriction of extraocular movement superiorly and hypertropia. Superiorly, there was ciliary staphyloma measuring 11x9x4 millimeters, and the overlying conjunctiva showed a sessile mass with multiple pale yellowish-white dots over it. Superior limbus of the was also involved, and choroidal folds were seen in the fundus. The eye was hypotenuse with a pressure of 8.5 millimeters of mercury. NLD was patent, and right eye examination was normal. ENT consultation was done, which was normal, and autoimmunity was also ruled out. Coming to the diagnosis, we diagnosed the case as ocular rhinosporidiosis. We did a conjunctival biopsy and histopathological examination, which showed thick-walled sporangia of large size with mixed inflammation. And we planned a complete excision of the conjunctival mass with tectonic scleral patch graft. Intraoperatively, the conjunctival excision was done, a Phonics-based flap was raised, and a 13x11 mm scleral graft was placed. It was slightly flanged over the superior cornea. Over that, we loosened the conjunctival and the conjunctiva, and the hooding was done using 80 Vicryl. Post-operatively, topical prednisolone antibiotics and cycloplegics were given. In this, additionally, oral dapsone 100 mg for 6 days in a week for 6 months was given. On a third-month review, there was satisfactory cosmosis with BCVA of 20/125, and resolution of the choroidal folds was noted. Coming to the discussion, Rhinosporidium seaberi is generally acquired by bathing in ponds contaminated by animal feces in warmer climates, and the in vitro production of extracellular proteases and lipases has been postulated to play a role in limited virulence of these organisms. Now, this release from the overlying conjunctiva might be responsible for the scleral ectasia that we saw in this patient. And over the years, many things like facial atta, cartilage, etc. have been tried for patch grafts. We decided to use the donor sclera for its strength, easy handling, and ready uptake by the host. And with little inflammatory reaction and rare rejections, avascularity of the graft may lead to necrosis, and if it is not firmly secured, then endophthalmitis may occur. That is why we hooded with the conjunctiva. Amniotic membranes can also be used in such cases. Thus, we took the decision of hooding with conjunctiva in our case. To conclude, we recommend the use of donor scleral patch graft with conjunctival hooding as a method to preserve the structural and functional integrity of eyes with large anterior staphyloma secondary to rhinosporidiosis. Thank you.
That was a great presentation. And I request some of our panelists, if you have any questions to her.
This scleral patch graft, how much is the follow-up? How long it was?
We have a 10-month follow-up for the patient. Yeah.
So because there was some problems. So how many cases you had this rhinosporidiosis?
No, so rhinosporidiosis, we have a lot of cases because this is an
No, 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 no.
endemic.
With this scleral patch graft.
Only one. This is the only case that we did for patch grafting, the one which presented with staphyloma.
Okay.
And we had a good result. So yeah.
Okay.
All right, are we good to move ahead or any questions?
I think we should move ahead.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and next we have Dr. Tanveer Ahmed. Sir, are you there? Dr. Tanveer Ahmed.
Doctor is there. I can see his name. Can you please unmute Dr. Tanveer Ahmed?
Actually, the names are coming all different. Amrita, you have to rename yourself.
Do we have Dr. Amrita Tilak?
Sir, I am here, sir.
Hello.
Hello, I am here, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Sudipta, I guess let's go for Dr. Amrita first.
Yeah, that's right. That's a better way.
Yeah.
Because we don't see.
Dr. Amrita
Dr. Tanveer is there, but he's not able to unmute himself.
Hello. Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm Dr.
Good morning,
Tanveer.
Doc. Okay. Are you ready with your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then let's give him a chance. Okay, go ahead. Share your screen, please.
Yes, Dr. Tanveer Ahmed, we can see your screen. Please start.
Good to go?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Tanveer from Silchar Medical College, Assam. So, my topic is conjunctival impression cytology in diabetic retinopathy patients, a comparative study. So in the introduction, as we know that diabetes is one of the leading cause of morbidity and mortality worldwide, and various studies have shown that people with diabetes are more prone to suffer from dry eye disease than those without the diabetes. This study was undertaken with the aim to find out the prevalence of dry eye disease in patients of type 2 diabetes mellitus and to find a correlation between the glycemic control and prevalence of dry eye. So in the materials method of the study was carried out over a period of 1 year, and the cases of type 2 diabetes were selected from patients attending the outpatient department only. Diagnosis of dry eye was made of the OSDI score, which was more than 12, with one of the positive specific for dry eye. Including criteria was all diagnosed cases of type 2 diabetes mellitus of either sex if they were in the age group of 35 to 75 years. Subject with secondary diabetes and those who are on other non-diabetic medications that could affect tear production were excluded from the study. Previous history of ocular surgery, persons with Bell's palsy, Sjogren syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, or Parkinson's disease were excluded from the study. In the materials of method, continuing with it, an ocular surface disease questionnaire was administered to all participants to assess the symptoms of dry eye and correlate them with the signs. A complete ocular examination of the lid margin conjunctiva was done. Examination of the fundus was also performed to assess the grade of diabetic retinopathy in that patient for further correlation. Following this, tests to diagnose dry eye were performed. These are tear breakup time, ocular surface staining by Rosebangle and fluorescent staining. Sherman's test and conjunctival impression cytology were also done. In the results that we have found, a total of 100 patients fulfilled the criteria and total 180 eyes were included in the study. The most common symptoms that the patient presented were increased frequency of blinking, itching, and eye fatigue. In this study, out of 180 eyes, there were 39, that is about 21.67 eyes had retinopathy, 20 eyes had the mild NPDR, 13 had moderate NPDR, 3 had severe NPDR, and 3 had PDR. All the patients with severe NPDR and PDR had Sherman score of below 5 mm. Coming to the graphical representation of the result, we can see we have this graphical presentation of HB1 levels and also the OSDI score. So this vertical axis is showing that with the increase in HbA1c level, that is with the increase in severity of diabetes, or rather its uncontrolled manner, we see that the OSDI score is higher. Coming to the next thing, the duration of diabetes, which is one of the most important things to decide its severity and the prevalence of dry eye. The orange color is signifying that there is no dry eye, and the blue ones are signifying there is dry eye. So we can see that in a duration of 6 to 12 months of diabetes mellitus, there was no dry eye found. 1 to 5 years, there was gradually increase in the diabetes. And then with the increase in duration of the disease, the diabetes mellitus, we can also see the prevalence of dry eye is also increasing. In the HbA1c level correlation, we can see when the HbA1c level was less than 7, we can see there was grade 0 of the dry eye maximum number. And again, with the gradual increase in the HbA1c level, we can see that there is an increase in the severity of the dry eye also. Now, this particular correlation has been found statistically significant, and the p value signifies that those two values can be correlated. In the discussion part, we find that the prevalence of dry eye in this study was found to be 48.33%. The study on diabetic patients showed that increased prevalence of dry eye, like Manaviat et al., showed 54% of those with diabetes had dry eye, while Hom and Delan did a study on patients with either diabetes or borderline diabetes, but our findings differ from the Kaiserman et al., which had a prevalence of 20.6%, as they determined the dry eye disease by ocular lubrication use. Our impression cytologic analysis showed a higher grade of squamous metaplasia and lower goblet cell density in the diabetic patients. Epithelial cells were larger and more polygonal, and the nucleocytoplasmic ratio was also increased. In severe cases, multinucleated variable staining cytoplasmic, small nuclei, even pycnotic or absent nucleic cells are found. Most of the previous studies have suggested that impression cytology is altered in the diabetic cases, like studies by Dogru M. Wuyun et al. And Knapp et al. And Ino et al. Ocular trauma is one of the frequently attended entity in the eye in OPD and MR. Incidence of ocular trauma causing traumatic.
Sir, please conclude, sir.
These are my references.
Dr. Kirandeep,
Okay, that was a very nice presentation.
Thank you.
And I would request our panelists to ask some questions. You have some questions to Dr. Tanveer.
So Tanveer, you did this staining, fluorescent staining and Rose Bengal staining, but why you didn't do only Lissamine green? Why is it so? Can you hear my question?
Hello?
In all those cases, suppose that if you have this dry eye staining scores, ODSI staining scores, that you have to do this Lissamine green staining.
Hello?
Yes, Dr. Tanveer, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Can you please repeat the question once?
So you stained with this West Bengal, not with Lissamine green. What's the reason for that?
Sir, it was because of the availability.
Okay. Okay. Thing is that in all those cases, it is preferable to use this Lissamine green, not Rose Bengal.
So available in the market. I was
okay.
Thank you.
So if there are no questions, this was great. So let's move on. Is Dr. Amrita Tilak there?
Dr. Sudipta, Dr. Amrita is not here, but let's go with Dr. Amrita Verma. She's ready.
No, she's not Amrita Verma. I think the renaming has to be done.
Okay. Okay.
She is Dr. Amrita Tilak, I
Great.
think.
Great.
Yes,
Great.
ma'am.
Yes,
Are you Dr.
Yes, ma'am. I am here, ma'am.
Yeah, and your name is written as Amrita Verma. Can you just rename yourself?
Okay.
Or you can just go ahead. That has been a confusion, actually.
Yeah. Thank you for correcting Dr. Sudipta.
Oh, okay. Shall I continue, ma'am, or shall I correct?
Please.
It's all right. Carry on with your presentation. You can rename yourself.
Okay.
Now we know you anyway.
Okay, ma'am. Good morning, respected delegates and colleagues. My topic for today's presentation is occupational corneal foreign body, a 1-year prospective study. There are now financial interest and patient consent is taken and no conflicts of interest. Corneal foreign bodies are the most common form of occupational ocular trauma and constitute about 20% of the all ocular traumas that we see in the clinics. And it is a leading cause of visual loss, which has a potential to cause economic burden to the patient. Other than work at work, these type of injuries can occur during domestic and leisure activities and during driving. The symptoms include pain, redness, foreign body sensation, lacrimation, and blurring of vision. And timely intervention by appropriate removal of the corneal body is necessary. And otherwise, it will lead to secondary scars, the persistence of rustring, and secondary infection, which can even end up in endophthalmitis. And these are preventable occupational hazard, which cause ocular morbidity, which lead the patient to loss of time at work, cost on healthcare, and economic burden to the patient. My aim was to assess the different setting in which these ocular injuries occur and its correlation with specific occupation and the awareness of eye care among workers. The materials and method. This was a hospital-based prospective study which was conducted in a tertiary care center in Western Odisha. 560 eyes were examined and detailed patient history, demographics, and clinical examination were carried out. The inclusion criteria included patients who participated voluntarily aged between 10 to 60 years and which are diagnosed or suspected case of corneal foreign body. Exclusion criteria were age limit less than 10 years or more than 60 years, full thickness penetrating corneal injury and injuries with sign of secondary infection. These were my results. It was found that 89% of the patients were male and 11% female, and 31 to 40 year age group was mostly affected, followed by 21 to 30 year male age group. And the most common business sector which was affected was metal industrial work, constituted about 45%, followed by construction work and agricultural work, and domestic injuries also constituted about 3%. Most of the workers were engaged in welding or metal grinding activity. Welding was most prominent. It constituted about 55%, followed by cement work and wood cutting. Most of the patients presented with a visual acuity of 6/6 or 6/9 partial, and very less patient presented with less than 6/24 visual acuity. And it was observed that right eye was most commonly involved than left eye. 85% were superficial corneal foreign bodies, which were removed under topical anesthesia under slit lamp, and 15% were deep corneal foreign body. These were my observation I have already discussed. Coming to the discussion, even though it does not cause significant visual impairment, the discomfort and pain associated with these injuries make the patient come to the ophthalmic clinics. Our studies showed a male preponderance, which was consistent with other studies like Jamina et al. And Gracia et al. The most common age group was 31 to 40 years, which is supported by Gracia et al. Studies, and other studies like Oslam and Das et al. Showed most of the corneal foreign bodies were metallic filament, which was consistent with our studies. In other similar studies, it was substantiated that majority of the patients came from metalwork industries like welding, grinding, and cutting, and the second most common occupation exposure was construction workers, and the foreign bodies were sand, metal particle, dust particles, cement, and paint particles. The agricultural workers most commonly get injured by the vegetative matter, which if not treated will lead to secondary corneal ulcers and long-term complication. And the reason was found to be that most of the patient, even though provided
Madam, please conclude your presentation.
Coming to my conclusion, the impact of ocular trauma lead to economic burden to the patient, and it can be easily preventable with proper awareness and wearing of the protective eyewears. That concludes my topic, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Amrita, that was a nice, crisp presentation. And the take-home message from you?
Ma'am, these are preventable.
Make it very brief. Make it a small message.
Occupational, it comes under preventable preventable eye injuries. So occupational hazard, if addressed properly and proper awareness is given to the patient, we can reduce a significant amount of this ocular trauma during occupation.
Okay, and man hours I understand, but economic burden from metal injuries, you had most of them recovered. What about the wood injuries? The injuries due to wood, it's a wood cutting, you said. So none of them developed into ulcer for in your case?
Ma'am, only two patients I followed were able to follow.
You
They
didn't have sufficient patients. Okay. Okay. So okay. We are good to go. Thank you so much, Dr. Amrita. And if Dr. Kulkarni is there.
Dr. Sudipta,
yes.
I just got to know that Dr. Kulkarni, Shilpa Kulkarni and Dr. Sheetal, they are not here. So can we go with Dr. Sangeeta Bhajar?
Yes, please go ahead.
So we have Dr. Sangeeta here.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Please share your screen.
We can't see you, Dr. Sangeeta. We can just see her. Yeah, where are you?
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Ma'am, can you please be louder?
Can you hear me, sir?
We can hear you, but you have to be a bit loud.
Am I audible, ma'am, properly?
Yes, no, not properly. Can you be a bit loud?
Okay. Can you see my screen? Is my screen visible, ma'am?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay. Shall I start, ma'am?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Title of my topic is Classical Herpes Zoster Ophthalmicus. I'm Dr. Sangeeta Bhajar, co-author is Dr. Vicky Chaudhary, ma'am. So case is a 52-year-old woman presented with fever since 3 days, burning sensation on forehead and around right eye, vesicular eruptions, discharge, diminution of vision since 1 day. She had low-grade fevers 3 days back and with headache, tiredness and malaise, pain and burning sensation on the right side of forehead, around right eye, eruption of groups of vesicles on the right side of the forehead and back, right upper eyelid and nose associated with itching, and redness and mucopollulant discharge from the right with decreased vision. Now, past history, she had there was no long-term illness, no drug history or no known drug allergies, no history of diabetes mellitus or hypertension, no history of, she had a history of chickenpox 10 years ago, and she's married, lives with husband and has 2 children. And she is not addicted to any drugs. She's a housewife and belongs to a middle class family. She's well-oriented woman in pain and concerned about her condition. Vitals were all normal, and on systemic examination, all the findings were normal. So, slit lamp examination, we found that her visual acuity was 612, and on external inspection, we found erythematous skin, groups of colored fleshy vesicles on the right side of forehead, right upper eyelid, around the mid margin, side and tip of nose. Hutchinson sign was positive, and conjunctiva was hyperemic. Cornea had microdendritic epithelial ulcers in the peripheral cornea. Fluorescein was positive, and sensations were reduced. You can see in the corneal diagram, there were few peripheral microdendritic epithelial ulcer and diffuse conjunctival congestion. Otherwise, eye was absolutely normal. Coming to the differentials, ocular differentials were herpes zoster ophthalmicus and herpes simplex keratitis. Cutaneous included eczema, herpeticum, vaccinatum, impetigo, exanthemes, drug allergy, contact dermatitis, and skin. So, coming to the discussion, herpes zoster is the same organism causing chickenpox, organism of herpes virus. Most frequently branch of the ophthalmic division of retina, causing characteristic painful skin rash affecting ocular tissues. And if coming to epidemiology, females are the most affected. 50 to 79 years are most giving peak incidences. 97% were immunocompetent. Herpes zoster ophthalmicus contributed to 0.05% of herpes and incidence is around 30.9 per lakh person yearly. So pathophysiology, we all know that primary infection is by the varicella zoster virus, which affects the dorsal, which remains dormant in the dorsal root of sensory neural ganglion, and reactivation occurs in case of any stress, trauma, or any
immunocompromised state. Now, risk factors includes 90% are susceptible after primary infection, old age, immunosuppression, malignancy. Now, there are three stages: pre-eruptive phase, acute eruptive phase, and chronic phase. Now, coming to the investigation, all patients should be investigated for CBC, RFT, LFT, and cytological examination can be done with the scrapings. And with this brief discussion, we come to the conclusion that it's the early acute eruptive phase of herpes zoster ophthalmicus. Treatment was given with tablet acyclovir 800 mg 5 times daily for 10 days, and with tablet prednisone 15 mg daily tapered over 2 days. And local treatment was given with acyclovir 5% skin ointment, topical antibiotics, homatropine, lubrication. Symptomatic treatment with cool compresses, local capsaicin cream, paracetamol. Post-herpetic neuralgia has to be considered, which occurs after 4 months after rash heals. 75% patients are 70 years age, over 70 years, and pain can be constant or intermittent. Now, future directions: eye drops containing tetrapeptides derived from substance P and IGF-1 are said to cause corneal healing and corneal nerve regeneration. Sterile eye drops containing thymosin beta-4 are also under trial. Amniotic membrane for healing epithelial defects are also under use. Now, prevention can be through vaccine, live or recombinant vaccine. Wherever recombinant vaccines are more preferred these days, and live vaccine are given to those who are having any contraindication to the recombinant vaccine. And immunoglobulins can be given as a post-exposure prophylaxis. So, take-home messages: herpes zoster is a common and potentially devastating entity, may demonstrate significant ophthalmic morbidity. Patient education and counseling is a must. Testing to uncover potential immunocompromise should be done, and post-herpetic neuralgia should be considered. It's a contagious and can transmit chickenpox, so this should be taken into consideration. Thanks.
Okay, that was great, Dr. Sangeeta. One thing I would like you to enlighten us on that: do all patients need prednisolone, and do all patients need oral acyclovir?
Actually, oral prednisolones, according to a report, oral prednisolone is said to decrease the duration of pain in the acute course. And sir, what was your second question?
Oral systemic antivirals.
Systemic antivirus, as such, there is no. Sir, systemic antivirus has to be given in all cases, and the duration of treatment can be varied because it is seen in elderly. The virus remains in the cornea for more than 30 days. So accordingly, we can titrate our treatment, and the renal profile should be taken into account because renal clearance of the drug should be considered, and all the parameters has to be judged accordingly.
Dr. Tuhin, we would like to have your comments on this.
Okay.
On the use of steroids.
So use of steroids should be given for all the patients, irrespective of the age. Okay.
Okay.
First, this, as per the guidelines, that 2 milligram or 1 milligram per kg body weight, you should give it initially for 2 weeks, or sometimes it can give it for 1 month in tapering dosage, as per the severity. And oral acyclovir initially to be given 800 milligram 5 times daily for 2 weeks, and there is no role of prophylactic dose. But usually after 2 weeks, 400 milligram BD or 800 milligram OD for another 4 weeks. So total 6 weeks. That is the big term.
Okay, thank you.
Dr.
So,
Mohit,
yes.
Before you go ahead, let me tell you, we have 19 minutes and we have 3 speakers to complete.
Yes, that's perfect. So I would like to invite Dr. Nandini Asija to give her presentation now. Is she there?
Yes, she is here.
Yeah, please.
So just a second, my screen sharing is taking a little time.
Dr. Nandini, what is happening when you click on the share screen?
So it's saying that allowed So it's saying that you're not allowed to share and
Okay,
it's locked.
give me a minute. Let me ask my technical team to please make you a
Yes,
co-host
sir.
for a moment. Okay, maybe you are logged in from 2 devices or not registered. Give me 1 minute.
Yes.
Till then, Dr. Khatri, you can have a quick discussion for 1 minute. Dr. Sudipta, you're there?
Yeah, in a post-COVID patient, do you think the treatment protocol should remain same, Dr. Tuhin? What I want to know is that in a herpetic keratitis, especially the zoster one, if the patient is a post-COVID patient, should the treatment protocol remain same or should we modify?
The protocol should be same.
Okay.
It should not modify, but thing is that you should be following these patients very rigidly and in a closed-eyed manner. Close follow-up.
Okay, so it's going. And any difference in topical acyclovir and topical ganciclovir?
Topical ganciclovir or acyclovir, if there is some corneal infiltrates, only it is having some role. For this skin lesions in herpes zosters, you should give this acyclovir skin cream. That is 5% ointment. Okay, but if there is no corneal involvement or infiltrates, no need of doing this acyclovir ointment, eye ointment.
So what is your preference, ganciclovir or acyclovir?
Ganciclovir.
Okay, that is great.
Okay.
And okay. So is Dr. Nandini ready now?
Dr. Nandini, can you check? If not, can we go to the next speaker? Till then, we can sort it for Dr. Nandini.
Sir, I cannot, sir. It's
You
saying
can.
that you're,
Dr. Nandini, you can try now. Give a try now.
sir, I'm clicking on screen share and I'm sharing my desktop, and sir, it is saying, sir, it's saying to go to my system preferences and unlock, and it's not unlocking, sir. It's not allowing.
Because you're a course now.
Your mobile cell
You
phone?
can share it now.
Can you use your cell phone?
Yes, sir, I'm trying, sir.
So is Dr. Nazma ready? Dr. Nazma?
Please unmute Dr. Nazma.
Dr. Nazma, can we have your presentation?
Dr. Nazma, please unmute. You're on mute. Yes, Dr. Nazma, we can hear you. Can you please share the screen?
Good morning, everybody.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, Dr. Nazma.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Nazma Begum, third year PG resident, ophthalmology department, Silchar Medical College. My paper is a clinical profile of herpes simplex keratitis in people of Southern Assam. There is no conflict of interest in relation to this study. Herpes simplex is a keratitis is a form of keratitis caused by herpes simplex virus type 1. The virus produces a variety of clinical manifestations due to its ability to infect a host and establish an indefinite and latent presence in the neuronal ganglia. Global incidence of herpes simplex is 1.5 million in every year. The impact of the disease in developing nation is not well established. A study conducted by Kaul et al. In North India estimated the incidence of herpes simplex virus keratitis 1 is 33.3%. Recurrence rate of ocular herpes simplex keratitis after an initial episode have been estimated 10% at 1 year and more than 20% at 2 years. The aim of the study is to document the various clinical presentation of herpes simplex keratitis and to assess the risk factor contributing to herpes simplex keratitis, to assess the result of specific therapy and follow-up, to document the incidence of recurrence. It is a hospital-based study conducted in Silchar Medical College from June 2019 to December 2020. All patients with corneal disease with symptoms and signs suggestive of herpes simplex keratitis, and having decreased corneal sensation were taken for the study. Sample size of 87 patients, 105 eyes were taken for the study. In each case, detailed history was taken. The eyes were examined under diffuse light and then under slit lamp, and staining was done. All patients received treatment according to the type of the keratitis. Cases were followed up to know the recurrences and visual morbidity. Follow-up was done for the first 3 days, and on 5th day, 10th day, and 14th day, and every month for first 3 months, and thereafter at 6 months. In case of recurrence, type of keratitis and interval from the primary presentation were also noted. In our study, we got more number of female cases, which is 48%, 48 cases, and 39 male. And age distribution, which is more in 20 to 40 years of age group, and less number of cases are found in more than 60 years of age. Unilateral cases are more, which is 69, and bilateral 18. Of the 87 patient, 93.1%, 49.9% patient complained of watering. Only 2.2% cases has lead vesicles. About 86.2% cases had defective vision. The type of keratitis, which is 41 cases were found with SPK. This is the Giemsa staining. Dendritic ulcer were positive in 11 cases. Some triggering in my study, some triggering factors could be elicited in 40% cases. Of the triggering factor, most common was stress followed by fever and trauma. Next is history of foreign body. Outcome of treatment. All the epithelial and endothelial keratitis responded well to the treatment, but 3 stromal keratitis patients showed aggravation whenever the medication was stopped and needed long-term medication. We got a recurrence rate of 10%, which is 9 cases during the follow-up period. And we got complication like opacity in 6 cases and raised IOP in 2 cases. In our study, females were more affected than males. Maximum number of patients belonged to 20 to 40 years of age group. Bilateral cases were found in 21% cases. Precipitating cause in 60% cases, onset was spontaneous, while in rest of the cases, some precipitating causes were found. That is fever, stress, history of minor ocular trauma. Other studies like Wilhelmus, they are in his study also found the recurrences of triggering of by fever, hormonal changes, UV radiation, stress, and ocular trauma. Most common type of
Speed up, ma'am.
inflammation
Speed
found
up.
was epithelial keratitis, followed by stromal keratitis, and then endothelitis. Conclusion is herpes simplex virus keratitis is a major cause of unilateral blindness. There is rising trend of its occurrence in developing countries.
Yeah, that was good, Dr. Nazma. I thoroughly appreciate your presentation and efforts put in to make the presentation, and it was good to see your inputs from Assam. So, as we are running short of time, if we get time, we'll have some more discussion with you. But for the sake of punctuality, I would like to invite Dr. Sheetal to give her presentation now. Dr. Sheetal Morskole, I think she's available here. I would like her to join now. Is she there, Dr. Sheetal?
Yes, she's here.
Yeah, make it fast, Dr. Sheetal.
I request Dr. Sheetal to please share your screen.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Sheetal, can you please turn on your video and share your screen, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Dr. Sheetal, please start.
Yes, sir. Problem, sir.
Dr. Sheetal, can you share your screen?
Yes, sir. Actually, there is a problem, sir.
Mr. Sanjay, Dr. Nandini was not able and now Dr. Sheetal is not able to do so. Is there any technical glitch you can correct?
I guess Dr. Sheetal is trying from her mobile. And till then, let's go back to Dr. Nandini. Can you share, please? Dr. Nandini, you can give a try. Can you share your screen?
Sir, I'm trying, but it's not coming, sir. I'm trying, sir.
Is any message you are getting?
Sir, it's saying that access denied, sir.
Access denied. Okay.
Okay, can we have Dr. Manasavina? Dr. Manasavina, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Go. Okay, good to go. Please share your screen, and if you can start, we'll have your presentation now.
Shut it, switched off. Share screen.
Unmute yourself, Manasavina. Dr. Manasavina, unmute, switch your video on, share your screen.
Yes, Dr. Manasavina, we can see your screen. Please start. We have only 11 minutes to go, please.
Dr. Manasavina, please start.
Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Ma'am, can you see me?
Yes, we can see your screen. Please go ahead.
Good morning, one and all. I'm presenting a paper on ophthalmologic practice during the COVID-19 in a medical college hospital, protecting yourself and protecting patients. As you all know that we are going through the COVID-19 pandemic from 1.5 years, so there is not much to introduce. But COVID-19 is caused by the severe acute respiratory coronavirus 2, which was first reported in December 2019. And Chinese ophthalmologist Dr. Li Wenliang was the first person to recognize this atypical pneumonia patient in his OPD while examining, and later, unfortunately, he succumbed to the disease. The WHO declared this COVID-19 as a pandemic in March 2020, and the first case in India was reported in Kerala January 27, 2020. So after this, there are many changes happening in ophthalmology practice. To take a good measures to prevent the cross-infection, we did this study with the aim to analyze the precautionary measures in ophthalmology OPD in a medical college hospital to prevent the COVID-19 transmission. So all the patients who enter into the hospital will be screened in a flu clinic initially with a history of COVID-19, such as the fever, sore throat, cough, etc. And also with taking a history of travel history and contact history. After that, we screen them for the oxygen saturation, pulse rate, and temperature, as you see in the pictures. If the patient is not having any symptoms and with the normal oxygen saturation with the normal temperature, we used to put a tag for them, and we'll allow them to enter into the OPD. So if patients with a critically ill, for them healthcare frontline workers will be allotted with a proper protective equipment and in a separate area, and they used to examine them. The patients with no symptoms, we used to enter into the ophthalmology OPD. Now OPD, we were maintaining a social distancing and allowing the attendance only if it is necessary, and regular sanitization used to do in a regular intervals. So all the frontline workers were given prophylactic hydrochloroquine initially in a first wave time, and when vaccination was available in a second wave, before that, all the frontline workers in hospital were vaccinated. So different measures of personal protections taken in different areas, like in a flu clinic, we were given all the complete proper personal protective equipment. In a OPD setup, we were using the protective glasses, N95 mask, examination gloves and face shield. In operation theater, we used to do for the RT-PCR test for all the patients initially. If they come positive, we used to take them in the COVID OT separately, and if negative, regular they used to take the OT in the regular OTs. So on in OPD, we were following the practice guidelines given by the AOS, and those precautionary measures such as the protections for the hand, the head, mouth, face, and the eye, which are the more important to protect these hand, like using the surgical glove, cap, N95 and goggles, and mask was compulsory for the patient. And other measures taken in the OPD, such as the installation of the breath shield to the slit lamp and OCT machine, and all regularly, like between every patient, we used to wipe the slit lamp, chin rest, headband and the chair with alcohol based solution. And as you see in the previous picture, we used to sterilize the trial frames, lenses and other things with using the UV sterilization. And fundoscopies, initially we were regular fundoscopies were denied, but later we started that also, but using only indirect ophthalmoscopes. Direct ophthalmoscopes was absolutely stopped, and the aerosol producing procedures like the lacrimal syringing, NCT and refractions and all were avoided. And other general precautionary measures were cleaning the floor every 4th hourly, and using the changing the gloves.
Madam, time's up. Please conclude. We are running here into schedule.
Separate doctor examining for them. I would like to conclude them in order to take a proper medicine. Okay, thank you everyone for this opportunity.
Okay, good. Dr. Manasavina, you made your presentation. As COVID affected one and all, and everybody out here was affected by COVID in the practice, and also can I have some inputs from the panel, Dr. Arundhati or Dr. Divyesh Shah, your comments on the COVID effect in your practice, and what special carry-home message you can give, that what helped you or what error that was drastic. So any one take-home message in practice during COVID times by the panel?
Dr. Mohit, before you go ahead, just let me remind you, one speaker and we have only 5 minutes. So please wind up quickly.
Okay.
Yeah?
So who is the speaker who's ready?
Dr. Nandini.
Okay, Dr. Nandini, we are waiting for your presentation. Please start.
Dr. Nandini, give a try if you can share, otherwise you can speak. Just give one last try.
Sorry, sir, couldn't hear.
Dr. Manasavina, stop sharing. You can stop sharing so that others can start.
Yeah, Dr. Nandini, can you hear me? Dr. Nandini, can you hear me? Unfortunately, she's not able to hear us. Let's give a try for next 1 minute.
Okay, Dr. Sheetal was also there. So Dr. Sheetal, Dr. Nandini, any of you is most welcome if you can share your screen. In the meanwhile, the panel can give inputs on practice patterns in COVID era. What special precaution or what special change that you took in your practice? Any of the inputs. We have such elite people in our panel, Dr. Divyesh and Dr. Arundhati, Dr. Sudipta, Dr. Tuhin.
Yeah. Dr. Mohit, with your permission, can I go ahead?
Oh, please.
Yeah, one thing that very nicely stated Manasvina, that we were taking a lot of precautions in the early stages, but with the second wave, we have become more accustomed to it. But one new thing that you said that we have incorporated in our practices, now we do not allow a lot of flying patients. We allow patients mostly by appointment. So this is one thing which I have incorporated. Number two is I have incorporated a lot of telemedicine in this. So cases which are red-eyed, They are given out telemedicine appointments, and when required, they're again called in for physical examination. So these are the two things that I have incorporated during the COVID time. She has nicely described the safety measures.
Thank you, Dr. Sudipta. And Dr. Nandini, are you ready? Dr. Nandini, can we have a few words from you? You can speak on what you want to say, just you can tell the topic and give your conclusion, what you found in your study.
I guess she's not able to hear us. Both the doctors are not able to hear
narrate her
us.
presentation, sir. She can just narrate her presentation. She can.
Yes, that is what I am saying. She can speak. She can only tell the conclusion.
Dr. Khatri, Dr. Nandini is connecting with a new login now. Dr. Nandini, can you hear me? Dr. Nandini, can you hear me? The message is coming that connecting to the audio. She is trying to log in.
Okay.
Dr. Nandini, please unmute yourself.
Do we have the list of
Yes,
participants for this session actually? Because
Dr. Ankur, I'll just send you right now once the speaker is done. Give me 2 minutes. Dr. Nandini, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, but I still cannot share my.
It's okay. It's okay, Dr.
screen.
Nandini.
You speak, Dr. Nandini. You just tell what your topic is and what did you
Ji, sir.
conclude.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. So my topic was, etiology, epidemiology of corneal opacity in 0 to 12 years children at tertiary care center.
Fine.
So as we all know, corneal opacity is one of the most preventable blindness caused, especially in children. Approximately 17.52 million children globally are estimated to suffer from this moderate to severe visual impairment. About 75% of this burden is reported from low middle income countries. The prevalence of childhood blindness in India is 0.8 to 1,000 children. So the Vision 2020 program of WHO has identified corneal opacity as one of the most important cause of childhood blindness and of priority, especially in low socioeconomic societies. So we included all the children less than 12 years of age with no active infection. So the study was conducted in Gandhi Medical College, Bhopal. The duration was from August 2019 to May 2020. And so we excluded all the children who had active infections over more than 12 years of age. So we found that 30% of these children were females and 70 were male. So the majority of this, the burden of this study was contributed by children who suffered trauma at some point of time, followed by post-infections, chemical injuries, keratomalacia, degeneration, dystrophy, and lastly, congenital causes. So the burden of these, the age group which burdened this study was 8 to 10 years of age, followed by more than 10 years, that is 10 to 12, then 3 to 4, and then less than 4. So the discussion, so the mean age of the children with corneal opacity was 8 to 10 months, 8 to 10 years. Majority of these cases belong to low socioeconomic status, followed by the congenital cause were most common cause of bilateral corneal opacity, whereas trauma was the most common cause of unilateral corneal opacity. Sir, LCO was the most common type of corneal opacity observed in 36.1% cases. This was followed by NMCO 30.6 and NCO in 16.7% cases. Sir, lastly, sir, I was not able to show much of the slides and observation graphs, but sir, the take-home message would be that, sir, cornea, sir, this is very much preventable. The rehabilitation of these children are of utmost importance because before we want to get rid of this and we want to rehabilitate our children before myopia sets in. So, sir, it was not
great.
much, but yes, sir.
So one thing I would like you to tell us that how do you treat keratomalacia?
Sir, first, sir, so these keratomalacia cases we got from pediatric OPD, sir. We generally did their overall workup. We did their blood investigation. Sir, we searched for other signs of malnutrition. And sir, then firstly, there was the overall rehabilitation of child, as in he or she is a malnutrition child. So, sir, we gave them the appropriate nutrition, so vitamin A doses along with all the other deficiencies.
What
Then,
dose
sir,
of vitamin A?
coming to sir, according to the age, sir, if it was, so generally the age group which presented us with keratomalacia was 4 to 5 years of age, sir. So, sir, unko sir pediatric age group along with sir vitamin D, vitamin C, and other rehabilitation drugs were given. And sir, ophthalmologically, we tried to prevent cornea from degrading more and more. We gave all the tear substitutes. So we gave ointments. We counseled the parents to look for we counseled the parents to sir in case sir they
Okay, I got your point, Dr. Nandini. You have made a lot of efforts in the presentation as well as in your work in the hospital. Keep doing good work. My best wishes to you.
Dr.
Thank you.
Khatri, we have next 10 minutes to wind up, please. Next session is ready.
I would just request you if Dr. Sheetal can pour in and give her inputs on her presentation. We can try.
Because we are already 3 minutes over. Next sessions are ready.
So
Dr.
if
Sheetal,
Dr. Sheetal can do it, fine. Otherwise, I am going to conclude. No other speaker is there. Any speaker from this session who wants to present, and if it's pending, please let me and Mr. Sanjay know, and we will try to have their presentation done just now.
No, but this will create little bit of delay in the next session.
So I just don't want to overstep. I can conclude. I just have one speaker who is not able to share the screen because of some technical issue. If it happens, then fine. Otherwise, I will certainly conclude the session. No intentions to encroach upon the next session. Dr. Sheetal, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you give your conclusion of study? What did you conclude in your study? Just speak. No need to share.
I'm here to present my study on ocular manifestation in HIV patient at Tertiary Care Hospital. There was no there is a proof from the institutional committee, and there was no financial care. As we know, HIV is an immunocompromising condition, highly variable in presentation, ranges from asymptomatic to various signs and symptoms, and a positive infection. It gradually depletes the CD4 lymphocytes, resulting in blood levels of helper T cells. In the prevalence of HIV-related ocular manifestations, inversely proportional to CD4 T cell count, introduction of highly antiretroviral therapy has reinforced the pattern of HIV-related ocular manifestations. Aim of the study was to assess ocular manifestations, including vision-threatening manifestations in tertiary care hospital. Coming to methodology, it was prospective observation study done from November 2092 after 1220 at Kanpur College, Bhopal, where he studied subjects with seropositive HIV cases. Inclusion criteria was patient consenting in the study and those attending the ARD center and clinic OPD, and exclude those who have other congenital and stable ocular distress unrelated to HIV and the patient with trauma. In this study, total 60 child were enrolled, and their demographic profile of the symptoms findings examination after taking consent.
Dr. Sheetal, please tell the conclusion of your study.
Can I tell results?
You just tell what did you conclude.
Yes, sir.
My student.
Permanent blind. So blindness, which you mentioned.
Yes.
Probably managed under early, or a healthcare professional also get affected and trained in early aspects. So as to pick up early case of observing manifestation of HIV, coordinate with the RT center for easy assessment and detection.
Okay, Dr. Sheetal, I would just apologize to you. We cannot go further and I can sincerely appreciate your efforts that you have put in to make the presentation. And then definitely I would try to hear you sometimes physically. So, Mr. Sanjay, I think we are done with the speakers.
Thank you. Yes, we are done. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohit Khatri. Thank you for doing this amazingly work. Thank you so much for this session number 2. Thank you. All right.
Thanks everyone, all the panelists. You were fabulous, and your guidance and your mentorship and enabled us this session nicely. And it was real encouragement for all the speakers who came from medical colleges, usually the postgraduates, and they would definitely have some learning, some encouragement from this session, and would definitely improve upon their presentations. And by God's grace, I expect that in future it would be a physical meeting, listening live and meeting and interacting with each other live in future sessions.
Thank you.
I request the panelists from the next session to take over, and with due permission from all the panelists and seniors, delegates and colleagues, I would now leave the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. You were fabulous and very much helping.